So one thing I love doing on this channel is observing different tropes across BL shows and Asian dramas in general. For me, a country's media is a reflection of its values, its people in power, and its inhabitants. And it's very interesting to observe the differences between BL shows from different countries. I would say Thailand, Taiwan, and Korea tend to lean toward BL shows where homophobia doesn't really exist, and the characters don't struggle with their sexuality or even talk about it. Of course, there are exceptions, but this tends to be the general idea. Chinese BL shows like The Untamed or Word of Honor are very heavily censored. Thanks, homophobia! And Filipino BL series are a lot more head-on. They tackle sexuality openly and feel a lot more like actual LGBTQ+ representation than the other countries. And then there's Japanese BL, which has always stood out to me because of the one recurring theme in all of its BL shows: societal pressure. So today I will be talking about society and the pressure it has on Japanese BL characters, because it's really interesting to see how much Japanese series are actually very self-aware of the pressure that comes with their own society. I'm not gonna attempt to speak about Japanese society in detail, because I've never stepped a foot in Japan and I am in no way an expert of the country. All the knowledge I know about it is from YouTube videos, but I do think it is proven that there is a high desire to fit in Japanese society. It starts early in school with all the students having standardized backpacks and school supplies, of course school uniforms which exist in many different countries, and even personal style which doesn't really tend to follow the cliché we have of Japan in the West, with for example the Lolitas of Harajuku. People's opinions of you matter a lot in Japan, and that's why Japanese people tend to be way less confrontational, because you can't really lose face publicly. And that's also the reason why this aspect of society ruling its citizens' choices and decisions is key in BL shows, as being LGBTQ+ openly is still a very rare thing in Japan. It's still a pretty conservative country, therefore being different, even though I personally believe that we're all unique in our own ways. Therefore, difference is just a concept meant to create a gap between us all, but being different is seen as something bad. And what can be more different than not falling into the sanctity of marriage and having kids? Something that is meant to be your life goals in most societies. Of course, same-sex relationships should be allowed to do all of this if they desire so, but it's not possible in most countries, including Japan. Therefore, being LGBTQ+ there is an act of rebellion. Your sexuality, something that is inherent to you, becomes a source of pressure and stress because of how it is perceived. And that is something that is overtly present in Japanese BL shows. So today I want to explore the ones that do tackle this theme, which is also gonna allow me to introduce you to some of my favorite BL shows of all time. So spoiler warning for all the shows you're seeing on screen right now. Also sorry in advance for butchering the names of every character today, and let's go. So, Mood Indigo is one of my favorite BL shows of all time, and it's been that way since it aired in 2019. It's also one of the most underrated BL shows ever, and the only BL show with a sad ending that I adore. It follows the story of Kido, who is a tall, masculine man who works at an erotic novels publishing company. He has troubles with his girlfriend whom he wants to marry because her parents judge him for his profession. When he goes to a funeral for an old university professor of his, he meets Kijima, who was always a loner in class and the only one to have gotten published and successful with his writing. Through a few shenanigans, Kido and Kijima end up living together. Kijima reveals he hasn't been able to write for a while and has no money, and Kido convinces him to write erotic novels for his company. For that, since Kijima's erotic novels are more about plot and character development than sex at first, he's gonna be sent to an old perverted erotic writer's house. And yet, he does make Kijima Kido's dick. Listen, maybe I should have given you a warning, but both this series and its prequel, which is actually its sequel, The Novelist, are extremely sexual and explicit in nature. But yeah, after that job, they share one of my favorite kiss scenes of all time and have sex. But right after, Kijima sadly has to go live with the old perverted writer to focus on his novel, and our two lovers get separated. It's at that moment that the societal pressure starts appearing on the show. When Kido visits Kijima and the old pervert, and he can't help but remember the things they did together, as Kijima appears normal in public. But Kido can't quite pretend as well as him. So when the old man goes to sleep, he kisses Kijima and gets a new from him. And that scene is, in retrospect, really telling of how the story is gonna end. While getting pleasured, Kido can't help but think about his girlfriend. He's having sex with a guy, yet he thinks of his girlfriend. That is truly a very telling moment of Kido's mindset. He clearly likes Kijima, he clearly desires him, yet something is holding him back. We know though that Kido was really looking forward to getting married, something he can't do with Kijima. His desire to do the thing that is expected from all of us in most societies translates a deep want to belong. His shame of his own job only translates that further. But anyways, their gets interrupted by the old man being sick, and Kido meets a new obstacle on his way, which is that his boss offers to transfer him to a regular publishing company, meaning he could still marry his girlfriend because he would get the approval of her parents. Kijima learns of the transfer and obviously feels deceived that the guy he thought he was building a relationship with is actually still focused on his ex-girlfriend. Ensues a fight where Kijima raises the important point of Kido wanting to marry someone who belittles his work. And again, it clearly shows that the status of marriage is more important to Kido than anything else. And then Kido says this. And gosh, I fucking love that show. Those two characters have been presented as basically different on every level since the beginning, but it's truly then that the main conflict of the show appears as clear as day. Kijima represents being openly LGBTQ+ without fear, while Kido represents conforming to society's expectations. And gosh, does this show excels at showing that. In the end, Kido turns down the offer to transfer to a regular publishing company, which does lead the viewer to think that he might end up with Kijima after all. And they do kiss and have sex on the day of the old pervert's funerals, yet it is immediately followed by Kido's voiceover that explained that they quickly pulled apart from each other after that, and Kido ended up marrying another woman. And frankly, I was really surprised when that happened on my first watch of the show, but it actually makes perfect sense. Kido has been a coward since the beginning. He deleted the novel he was writing because he read Kijima's and it was incredible. So even though he decided to stick with his job, he did continue aspiring to have a quote-unquote normal life, because that's who he is. The series ends on a bittersweet note. On the same scene the show started with, of Kido almost kissing Kijima years later in a cab, mirroring their first kiss, and Kijima pulling away. The cab parks and Kijima gets out. They exchange a goodbye full of love and warmth, and Kijima walks up a flight of stairs. As he knocks on the door, Kido comes out of the cab, calling for him, having seemingly realized his mistake all those years later, ready to tell him that he loves him like he's never loved anyone before. But the door opens and reveals Kijima's boyfriend that we discovered in The Novelists, the previous series of the franchise. So Kido gets back into the cab and they drive away. This series is seriously underrated and amazing, and I adored Kido as a character. He's pathetic but also funny, manly but also childish, illogical but endearing. And he doesn't get his happy ending. He waited too long to have it. He let societal pressure rule his life and he ends up regretting it. Despite being a sad ending, which tend to really not be my favorites, I take this show as a cautionary tale, to always listen to my heart and never let others rule the way I live my life. Kido might have been a coward like many others, but he's one of the most important characters of my life. For another show I love, I feel like Life Love on the Line has quite a similar storyline to Mood Indigo. Ito and Nishi meet in high school and start dating. For more than a decade, until they turn 28, their relationship is really good. That being said, the relationship is also hidden from all. It starts when they're 19 and Ito drags Nishi behind a pillar to kiss him in the subway, and continues with the both of them never telling their parents about their relationship despite living together as adults. The only family member who knows of Ito's sexuality is his sister, and that's only because she accidentally saw the two of them holding hands. That hidden aspect of their relationship is once again very representative of LGBTQ+ individuals in Japanese society, who often don't come out to their family because not fitting in the tiny box of who you're supposed to be in the eyes of society is scary. And obviously the people closest to you who raised and love you are the scariest to come out to. But the part of the plot that reminds me of Mood Indigo comes once Ito and Nishi turn 28, and Ito starts having doubts. After all, they're approaching 30, and most Japanese people want to be married before that age. The secret bubble that they have built isn't enough anymore, and Ito wonders if an LGBTQ+ relationship is really meant to be forever. Maybe it's something that you can have in your youth before you conform to society's expectations and get married. A scene that's really important is when Ito helps a woman with her baby go up the stairs in the subway. Ito looks at the baby and realizes that he will never have that if he stays with Nishi. Because sadly in most countries, gay adoption is either extremely difficult or basically impossible. And blood relation is extremely important in most conservative countries, including a lot of Asian countries. And that reaction from Ito, that thought process, shows clearly the view that society as a whole, and LGBTQ+ people themselves sometimes, have on being queer in Japan. That it will never be the same as a heterosexual relationship, that there will always be something lacking, and that it's not really a sustainable way to live. Obviously, that's all bullshit, but that way of thinking makes Ito break up with Nishi after a decade-long love story. He quickly gets married, but as you can guess, that doesn't bring him happiness. That doesn't fulfill him more than his relationship with Nishi, whom he still loves deeply. Ito, by trying to fit in, to be like everyone else, to conform, has ruined the love of his life. And I haven't talked about how much Ito's parents are there to represent their society's traditionalism yet, so I'll do it now. From the beginning, Ito is seen as the perfect son compared to his older sister, who's way more stubborn and goes to study abroad. From the beginning of the show, we've seen pressure build up for Ito from having to be the ideal son, and it all explodes in a scene where the whole family is reunited. Ito has decided to get divorced from his wife because he realized he still loves Nishi, and his sister brought her fiancé to lunch at the parents' home. Only the fiancé isn't Japanese. The parents' traditionalism shows up again when they completely reject this relationship, not wanting their daughter to end up with a foreigner. And that's when Ito admits his relationship with Nishi all those years to defend her. It's a very raw and beautiful scene, and I like that the father was the one who accepted him, since usually men are the ones to be more homophobic in order to not appear gay in the eyes of other men. Which frankly could be a whole video on its own. I especially like that Ito comes out of nowhere, when he's not even with Nishi anymore, when he's gotten married to try and conceal the fact that he likes men. Yet he comes out of frustration from his parents' behavior, and it does feel pretty realistic. In the end, Ito does end up with Nishi, and they spend the rest of their lives together. But I do think the inclusion of this breakup, this need to fit in, is very much what tells Japanese BL shows apart from others. Being aware of its own country's shortcomings and societal pressure on its LGBTQ+ members. Another hidden relationship is the one in What Did You Eat Yesterday? Shiro and Kenji are men over 40 who live together and are a couple. Shiro's parents are aware that their son is gay, but a major storyline of the show is Kenji going to meet them. Despite being out to them, Shiro struggles at the idea of making his parents meet his boyfriend. And for me, it's already really interesting to see that Shiro is out to his parents. Probably because he's an unmarried man over 40, and he had to explain to them why. But that's where the openness of Shiro and Kenji's relationship stops. They are friends with another gay couple, which is great, even though I do really dislike Wataru a whole lot. But I do appreciate the show showing the community aspect of being LGBTQ+, something that tends to lack in BL shows and be more present in gay movies. And I really think this show approaches a really interesting dichotomy. Kenji, who is a hairdresser, is openly gay at work, while Shiro, who is a lawyer, is absolutely not. For me, it's really interesting to see how two diametrically different professions, who are regarded very differently in society, offer different comfort zones for LGBTQ+ people to be themselves. Since Kenji is a hairdresser for women, he can be his happy, feminine, gay self. But Shiro, who needs authority and seriousness in his work, is not afforded the same opportunity. A major plot point of the show is that since Shiro doesn't have a wedding ring, his colleagues are trying to figure out if he is in a relationship or not. And Shiro never tells them by the end of the season. And that was an interesting choice because on the one hand, there were moments where I wanted him to say he had a partner to be left alone. But in retrospect, I also appreciate the decision to not have Shiro come out to them. Because coming out, especially when it's written by straight screenwriters, has always been treated as something that is due to the straight characters on the show. Something that a queer character needs to go through in order to be their quote-unquote real self. And while coming out can be a very important step for many people, it is not mandatory. LGBTQ+ people do not have to make it their life's mission to announce everywhere they go that they are queer. So why would Shiro have to tell his colleagues, which are not his close real-life friends, about such an intimate part of his life? Of course, though, it sucks that this whole question is even being discussed when straight people never have to question whether or not to talk about their relationship openly because they know they'll be accepted. For me, this storyline was really interesting, and overall, I loved watching an older gay couple navigate through life because it's really not what is usually the focus of BL shows. Oh, and also the food always looks incredibly delicious, of course. Now let's move on to the beautiful story that is his I Didn't Think I'd Fall in Love. It's a very interesting show to talk about being closeted in Japan, and especially gay men forcing themselves to have relationships with women to try and fit in. In this series, Nagisa clearly develops a crush on Shun very quickly. He likes him so much he starts completely disregarding his friend Shika, who has a very obvious crush on him. And Nagisa also tries to test the water by telling Shun about this whole tale about their city, that a monk was in love with a boy and the boy killed himself in the sea. That tale is also interesting for the theme of societal pressure, because the boy kills himself because he could not handle loving a man in the eyes of society. Something that is mirrored by Nagisa, not only in this series, but in its sequel movie as well. Nagisa has dated an older woman, which to be honest is extremely predatory. Why is a 20-something dating a 17-year-old? But anyway. Nagisa was dating this woman not long before Shun entered his life. And when he starts thinking that Shun likes Chika, he then kisses Chika and tries to date her. And by the way, that's not in the series, but Nagisa will marry a woman and have a kid with her in the movie. So that's clearly a pattern for him. But what I like the most about this series is that once Nagisa reveals to Chika that he likes Shun and not her, there's this beautiful discussion between them where the topic of societal pressure and being gay in Japan are discussed. And I thought that was a really important conversation to be had. Nagisa talks about feeling depressed when he learned about the attraction to the other gender that all the boys are supposed to feel, when it was the opposite for him. About being rejected by the boy he liked, and rumors starting to spread at school, scaring Nagisa's parents and having him move here. And suddenly, him dating the older woman, trying to get with Chika too, makes a lot more sense. Nagisa says that he tried to like girls by dating them, and that he doesn't dare to tell Shun he likes him because he's scared he'll react like his old friend. That story was very compelling to talk about the confusion that a lot of LGBTQ+ teens experience when they first come to terms with their sexuality or identity. Not because they don't know who they are, but because something that is so natural and inherent to them is opposite the norm. And that's why representation matters. And that's why we're starting to work our way to a more understanding world of queer identities. Because talks like that are present in media. Nagisa's story is extremely compelling. And frankly, I just really like this series. It's short and sweet, and I really enjoy its female characters being interesting and quirky, as well as having their own agency instead of being either evil or useless like in most BL shows. But most of all, it's that conversation between Nagisa and Chika that will always stay with me. Next we have My Brother's Husband, a beautiful story that doesn't really focus on love, but rather acceptance, grief, and mending broken relationships. Yaishi is the dad of a beautiful little girl who gets visited by his estranged twin's husband, his gay twin obviously, who is sadly dead. Seeing as they're twins, Mike, said husband, is pretty moved every time he sees Yaishi. And Yaishi's daughter also has questions as to who Mike is to them. Also, unless it wasn't clear, Mike is not Japanese. So it's almost as if this show tackled the storylines of both siblings in Life, Love on the Line in one character. The whole story is about navigating the weird friendship that forms with his brother's partner while his brother is dead and they are now living together. This show is incredibly touching and tackles Ryoji's, that's the dead gay twin, closeted life before his death in a very striking way. The first scene of the show is Ryoji coming out to his brother as a kid, and then Yaishi's voiceover explaining that the both of them rarely ever talked ever again. Ryoji going to study in Canada and never coming back. Societal pressure is a central theme of the series, as coming out literally created a split in the twin brothers' relationship. But also because Ryoji made the conscious decision to move abroad as soon as he could. Once the little girl learns that Mike was married to Ryoji, she asks if two guys can even get married. And the show makes a big point of highlighting the fact that same-sex marriage is not legal in Japan. And I think it truly shows a lot of Japanese people, and even other Asians, and I would even say other non-Western countries, view of homosexuality as inherently something that is not from their country. And that is only a Western thing. Now obviously that idea is greatly flawed, as LGBTQ+ people have always existed all over the world. But it's interesting to see that sort of preconceived idea being challenged by this show. And overall, the show is about not only Yaishi properly learning to mourn his brother, but also becoming more accepting and finally welcoming someone who should have already been a beloved member of the family, Mike. There's also Cherry Magic, which I never quite know where to place in the three categories I created in my Is BL LGBTQ+ representation video to determine whether or not a BL show strives to be LGBTQ+ representation, because frankly I would place it under neutrality of representation for not really talking about LGBTQ+ issues and the characters fitting in with most Thai, Taiwanese and Korean BL shows where the love story sort of happens in a vacuum. But, and that's why I'm talking about it today, although briefly, it does have a couple of moments where societal pressure does kind of show the tip of its nose. And yes, I just attempted to translate a French expression into English. Don't mind me. First of all, during Adashi's confession to Kurosawa, he does mention the fact that they are both guys, which seems to contribute in some ways as to why he intended to initially ignore the confession. In fact, when he first discovers Kurosawa's crush on him through his magical powers, he clearly states that if it was a woman like his colleague, he would have been overjoyed. That statement, although subtle, shows clearly that Adachi had never really questioned his sexuality before the events of the show. So the realization that he does have feelings for Kurosawa, who's not only a man but his colleague and someone he considers way above his league in everything, is of course something he takes time to admit, even to himself. But that man-loving man aspect of the relationship is never really explored again. And the show doesn't really talk about the pressure of being LGBTQ+ in Japan again concerning the two main characters. That being said, Minato is the only openly gay character of the show that explicitly uses the word and is defended by his friend Yuta, who thinks Tsuge is discriminating against him. I really like that scene because first it's a complete misunderstanding as Tsuge is in fact in love with Minato, but it was really great to see firstly an out Japanese character, but also how ingrained the fear of homophobia is in LGBTQ+ people all over the world. That Minato and Yuta immediately thought Tsuge was being a bigot when he was just very much in love. But sadly it kinda stops here for this show, which does acknowledge the societal pressure surrounding being LGBTQ+ in Japan, but never really goes below the surface. And I also wanted to talk about Ossan's love because, well, for me, it is also in the category of neutrality of representation like Cherry Magic. Maki is an openly gay character, and the show has a very interesting scene for today's theme. Maki takes Haruta to meet his family, and he's open about his relationship with Haruta to his dad, who takes it not very well. Once again, the parental figure represents the conservative and frankly homophobic aspect of society. And while this scene is played for laughs, and by the look of the mother and sister, the dad will come around eventually, it's important to know that in reality, a coming out going this way would have been disastrous and could have led to Maki getting disowned, or at the very least, feeling heartbroken by his dad's rejection. There's also the surprise on the famous actors' faces when Maki reveals that they're a couple, showing that society really sees homosexuality as something almost shocking, a plot twist of sorts to normality. Also, like most relationships we've seen today, Haruta and Maki's relationship is completely hidden to others at first, and they have to make a whole coming out speech to announce it to their colleagues who react once again, shocked. Again, it really shows the mentality around coming out and the pressure that can build up from being LGBTQ+ in Japan. And finally, and frankly, I put this show at the end because I genuinely just don't get it. We have what I will shorten to fujoshi since there's no English title and I simply do not want to butcher the original one. But frankly, at some point I hesitated doing a full video on this show because it is insane. Like, I finished it in absolute disbelief. Because, and I'm still not entirely sure, it doesn't seem to know whether or not it wants to be a gays are people too kind of show, or a gays lead very sad lives void of any real connection besides sex and need a fujoshi to save them message. Yeah, this show is pretty problematic. One scene that has nothing to do with the theme of today's video, but I have to mention, is a scene, frankly the climax of the whole series, where our main character has been outed to the whole school, and his girlfriend whom he used does this whole speech trying to sort of defend him, but mostly making it about herself. For info, the main gay character literally tried to commit suicide because of his self-hatred and the bullying he faced. So what would you think would be the main sentence of that whole speech? Yep! And then she manages to tell the story of how she got bullied for drawing two guys kissing and like, girl, not to discredit you or anything, but are you comparing being gay, closeted, then outed, then fucking suicidal, and jumping from a fucking building to you liking to watch men making out? This scene truly symbolized the moment I completely lost hope in this show trying to be anything besides gloomy gay drama number 489. And even then, it focuses so much on its fujoshi character that there are so many sad gay movies way better and more reflective of the LGBTQ+ experience than this. If you want sad gays, watch Brokeback Mountain. I don't know what to tell you. But anyway, sorry, rant over. We're going back to societal pressure, which is very present in this show. We're introduced to our main character, Jun, who is very well aware that he is gay. He hides that fact to everyone around him, especially his classmates, and has sex with an older married man. Which, again, that is extremely predatory. Why is a 30 years old having sex with a 17 years old? Sir, you need to go to jail! The worst thing is that they do frame that relationship as containing genuine feelings from both sides, despite the gross age gap and the fact that it is a literal affair. And the whole show is narrated by Jun's voiceover, who has a very gloomy idea of what it is to be gay. And at first I thought the writers just wanted to show Jun's self-hatred, and he sure has a lot, but as I said, the more the show progressed, the more I realized that this is literally what the writers think of gay people. Which, yikes. But anyways, Jun discovers his classmate Miura buying a BL comic, and they bond over him keeping it a secret at school. Which, again, they treat liking BL as if it was a fucking crime, when legit most women enjoy men-loving men romances for a reason or another. But anyway. And so I'll skip forward because this video is getting way too long, but basically she gets a crush on him, and instead of turning her down, Jun decides to date her, basically trying to quote-unquote turn straight. And again, I don't recommend you watch this show unless it's to rip it to shreds, but I do think, and I might be biased because the actor who plays Jun is the same who plays Utamaro in Ossan's Love, and I've always had a crush on him. But I do think the actor did a great job showing how tortured Jun is of his sexuality because of how it will be perceived by the society around him. But again, I do think the writers go too far in writing gay pain and sort of romanticize it, if you will. I still needed to talk about this show in the context of this video, but yeah, it's really not that good. Though the sentence "God is a fujoshi" will always have me laughing until I tear up.
神様は不女子なんじゃないかな?
To conclude, and I've waited until now to talk about this because it is really something that touches every character we've seen today. But we can see how present societal pressure is in Japanese BL shows, but more importantly, how badly it affects its characters. From forcing themselves to date a woman, which is both sad for the character in question and the woman he is manipulating, to staying closeted to their close ones, and even just feeling immense pressure, stress, and anxiety around the topic of sexuality. I know what I'm saying is not very groundbreaking, but feeling like an outcast of society, like a freak, is surprisingly not good for your mental health. Who would have known? For me, these characters are very representative of what it's like being LGBTQ+, not only in Japan, but in any society that is still deeply conservative and almost refuses to acknowledge the existence of LGBTQ+ people. And I do applaud these BL shows for acknowledging and even sometimes challenging the status quo. And that's ultimately why I wanted to highlight them today. Hopefully though, with more representation, which is the number one thing that can broaden horizons, and just social media and the internet in general, younger generations are becoming more accepting. Let's hope that one day the characters I've talked about today will be able to be openly themselves without fearing their society's wrath. But there's still sadly a long way to go. I hope you enjoyed this video, which took me way longer than expected to write. I'll see you next time and have a great day.